looking back at history, especially in 1920s and 1930s, Italy and Germany, who was the one that was standing to the side while the fascists actually came through? A lot of it was the liberals and even some of the
Yeah.
social Dems. They stood to the side. They were like, we don't really want to bother nobody. We don't want to tip the apple cart. And a lot of
Yeah,
people
yeah, yeah.
were like, tip the apple cart because they're going to kill us all. And so now we're just like, you see? So we're trying to prevent that, because if you keep standing to the side and just allowing them, then it is going to end up in winding up getting a lot of us killed. And so that's what I see. But it also comes with speaking to them in a way that doesn't cause them to shut down.
Right.
Because if we speak to them in a way where they become defensive, they're not going to hear what we're saying. And
That's right.
so we have to treat liberals like we treat MAGA. We have to put things in a way where they will understand. Some won't. In fact, a few won't. But even if we could take the argument and maneuver it in such a way where they can understand, maybe they may not pick it up, but the people around them may pick up some little nuggets, and it may grow in their head,
Sure. And so let me go back to an earlier question of how we could articulate things. So when I'm in leftist circles, everyone talks about, rightfully so, capitalism owning both parties. And I hear this all the time. And we say, well, it's two of the exact same parties. And you're going to lose a lot of liberals that way, because there are some differences, but there are 90% the same. But I think the equation has to be articulated a little differently. Mm-hmm. You're not voting Republican, Democrat. You're voting Republican versus Democrat, and plus the loss of resistance. And that's the big part, meaning there's some things that when Trump was doing, we were in the streets by the thousands. I was videotaping them by the thousands. Just that Trump did it. Kids in cages, Muslim ban, his rhetoric around police, what he talked about, people came out and people fought back. And the second Biden got elected, all of a sudden, those same people, and I'm speaking mostly of white liberals, they went to sleep. They took a nap. So my thing wasn't Trump versus Biden. My thing was Trump versus Biden plus a loss of resistance. So if Biden says something like, we're going to have 100,000 more police on the street, there's not a peep. There ain't no one in the streets. No one's fighting back. If Biden increases the ICE budget, it's not, or keeps Title 42 that was implemented by Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. Well, we hate Stephen Miller. We understand intrinsically Stephen Miller's a white supremacist. We get that. We're going to go in the street. But when Biden kept Title 42, there's no resistance. Now it's okay. Okay? So everything Biden did that was and does that is Trumpian now gets a pass, where maybe Trump couldn't even get away with some of the stuff Biden gets away with. So for me, it's not Democrat versus Republican. It's Republican versus Democrat plus the loss of a resistance and fighting of a movement. Because at the end of the day, Democrats will never, ever, ever fight against whoever their figurehead is. No matter what they do, no matter how right-wing they are, no matter how anti-human rights they are, no matter how many people they incarcerate, no matter how many bombs they drop, no matter how many police they put on the street, as long as there's a D before that name, they will say it's okay because they're not as bad as Trump. And there's something psychotic in that thinking, something very wrong in that thinking. So wrong that you could actually say Biden doesn't even need to be primary. So you don't have the pragmatic excuse anymore of we have two choices. You don't even want to primary him, Bernie Sanders. So I got a problem with that.
You know what? This is a tale as old as time, because who passed NAFTA? It was Clinton that passed NAFTA, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Clinton was able to do things that Reagan was like, oh, that's too hot. I can't touch it. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Clinton was the one that signed the 94 crime bill.
Yeah.
Reagan didn't touch it.
Reagan didn't do that. Clinton do that. I want to go 6 years deeper than that. The worst crime bill of all the crime bills was actually 1986. And the 1986 crime bill was far worse than 94. 94 was terrible, the Biden bill and Clinton. But Biden's worst work was 1986. He had presidential aspirations. And what Reagan wanted to stop the crack cocaine disparity at 20-1, which is already wild and nuts. Biden pushed for that disparity to be 100-1. Meaning, if you had a piece of a bag of sugar that you get there, or you got a huge Domino's 2-pound bag, that cocaine versus crack, those two sizes would become equivalent when one was in powder. And Biden fought for that. And Biden fought for the 5-year mandatory minimum sentences just on possession, not distribution, possession of crack. And we have all the video of him saying this, right? And Biden went to the right of Republicans on mass incarceration, including Reagan, including Strom Thurmond. And we have to understand that because we warned about this. And now he's doing the same thing again with policing now that he's president now. That we're supposed to get a warmer Uncle Joe. And that never happened. And we warned about it because Biden's way has always been, if I go to the right of the Republican, if I'm harder than the Republican, that could take that issue away. In other words, black people are just pawns. People's lives being destroyed through mass incarceration or bombs abroad, it doesn't matter as long as I could stay in power. That's Joe Biden for you. And he gets away with it because we allow him.
Yeah, because we allow it. That's a really good point. And speaking of the allowance of what these politicians are doing, speaking of President Biden, I have a question for you, and this is more of a situational question that I ask a lot of people. So, Chuck, you're now president of the United States. It is your inauguration.
Yeah.
What are 3 policies that you're going to do, that you're going to enact within your first 100 days?
I'll go more than 3. I'm going ham on executive orders.
Go ahead.
I'm going ham on executive orders. Medicare for all, tuition for all, anything. And when you say something like this, invariably there's going to be a Democrat, someone from the Democratic Party in my timeline saying, don't you understand the Constitution? Are you an idiot? Do you not understand how the law works? That's going to be contested in court, and you may not get away with it, which may or may not be true, right? But what Trump did is he didn't care. He changed the national conversation. There are 2 types of power. There's power of policy and there's power of rhetoric. And Trump was a master in using his rhetoric. He changed the Overton window of what we talk about and what we didn't. Every time he tweeted some craziness, every time he put some executive order many that would invariably be shot down later. He made the news networks talk about what he wanted to talk about. And by changing the national conversation, you're changing the culture in America. And by changing the culture in America, you're being able to change future legislation, whether you got that piece of legislation in now or not. So all of these banning books, all of these laws we're seeing locally, all around the country, wouldn't have been possible a few years ago, but Trump's rhetoric did it. We don't need Trump. He's replicated himself. He's cloned himself. He's changed the white supremacist culture so that everyone in his party could go much farther now than they could before he arrived. So when you have a rhetorical power, Biden will never use the rhetorical power, and Biden apologists will say, well, it's not going to work. It doesn't matter if it works or it doesn't work. You're going to change the conversation, change the culture, and we'll change the law later. And if you don't understand that, then you don't know how movements happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was a great point. I mean, because, hell, Bernie didn't even ascend to the White House, and he changed the conversation.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, putting aside my extreme disappointment and respect for him, I mean, he did change the conversation from 2016 onward. Well, 2015 onward.
Yeah, he did. He absolutely did, more in loss than almost any other Democrat. I mean, you don't have to win to change the conversation. Barry Goldwater, who lost in 1964 to Lyndon Johnson, was one of the most influential politicians in history because he started the New Southern Strategy, new iteration. He went straight white supremacist on everything, and everything that came after him, that movement that came after him, the Nixon and the Southern Strategy, and everything we see today in the Reagans, all are rooted in Barry Goldwater. So I always ask myself this question. They say, well, Bernie would have won, or what? I think he would have, and I think 15 of the 20 Democratic candidates would have in an anti-Trump vote. At a time where he was being blamed for COVID. I don't think Biden gets that moment back again. But here's what I'm saying: what if Bernie lost? What if Bernie went guns blazing, and Medicare for all, and still lost? I think you would have the movement very similar to Barry Goldwater in 1964 continue to carry on many of those ideas that he went scorched earth on. And that I'm not a believer that if you lose going scorched earth, you could change the future. You would see a lot of things change locally because all those coalitions that he built, they would change locally. That's what we see with Republicans, right? When Republicans lose, they're still changing locally. When Obama became president, all of a sudden the Tea Party grows and they're changing everything locally. When Biden becomes president, all of a sudden all these Republicans are changing locally and having fascist laws. Why doesn't that happen when a Republican's president? Why don't you see Democrats changing things locally? But you don't have that movement going on. So I believe you go guns blazing, whether you win or whether you lose. And even if you lose, you might win in the long run.
True. I just don't have faith in the Democratic Party anymore.
No, neither do I.
Yeah. I'm looking at the people running. I'm just like, really? This is your guy? This is your gal? All right. That's how I feel, and that's
I don't have faith
anymore.
I have no faith. I have no faith in a party that would come to the conclusion, we don't even need to primary Joe Biden. I mean, how do you even come to that conclusion? Like, how corrupt must you be to come to that conclusion?
Well, there's some people who still think that you can just take it over, and I'm like, that project has been tried and that project has failed.
Yes.
So why are we continuing to try that? You know what I mean?
We learned.
I go back to, I'm not sure if you got to catch that episode of Sabi Sabs on her show, where she had DNC fraud lawsuit attorneys on her show, where they actually were in the courtroom where the DNC lawyer actually argued that they do not need or have to or even want to actually go by the will of the people. They're a private organization.
Yeah.
So I want to get this through not only to people who side with the Democrats, but also the Republicans too. Because if the DNC is like this, then surely enough, the RNC is just like this too.
Yeah.
And I live in a state where they went overwhelmingly for Trump, but they also passed a $15 minimum wage. It's like,
Remind me what state you live in.
Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, to be honest with you, when you put the plight of people in their hands when it comes to policy, they're going to go, like Beyonce said, to the left. you know?
Yeah.
And they do that. But the problem is that, you have these politicians that, I hate to say it, some people may get mad at me for this, but being on the right is actually good for corporations. It just is. So therefore, they're going to go to the right every single time because that's what the politicians, that's who they acclimate themselves to.
Right. Right. No, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I think there's so many game changers, but I think the two biggest seismic game changers of the last 30 years is one is the Supreme Court decision of Citizens United of making corporations people, because now it's so much harder to get together and fight them because these billionaires are so rich and they're buying politicians right and left, and locally they're doing it locally. That's what we spend so much time on national politics. Stuff is really moving locally, right? And they buy local politicians, and so that's happening. And then the one before that, which gets a lot less attention, but it's the 1996 Telecommunications Act. and
Yes.
that allowed media consolidation. And prior to that, you had to have a cap, say, on 40 radio stations you could own. You couldn't order more than that. You couldn't own 1,000 or 2,000, and that lifting the caps under Clinton, by the way. What
Yes.
happened is now all media is in the hands of 5 corporations, where it used to be spread out. It killed black radio overnight. It killed news. It killed sports media. In many ways, it killed music as well. People don't realize that as well, because music, you'd have these pockets that would come up in these local communities, and the local DJs would bring it to light. And now you have some person in the middle of America hitting a button to play the same top 40. It killed so much. But it's not talked about. And why would it be? Because the corporations that benefited from it are not going to talk about it.
Of course. I think it was also Buckley versus Vallejo. That was also a big part of corporations being able to, dominate the political space as well. So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.